Mr. President, thank you for joining us. This economic crisis has been so severe that it has literally pushed all the other issues off the television, out of the newspapers. But when you outlined your program for Afghanistan and the new strategy, it really underlined in the starkest terms that we may not be talking about these serious issues, but there's some very serious things going on out there. So I'd like to start there,
please,
if I could. This is a hugely ambitious plan. 22,000 more troops. You're going to increase spending by 60%. You said in your announcement, we must defeat al-Qaeda.
Right.
This has really now become your war, hasn't it?
I think it's America's war. And it's the same war that we initiated after 9/11 as a consequence of those attacks on 3,000 Americans who were just going about their daily round. The focus over the last 7 years, I think, has been lost. What we want to do is to refocus attention on al-Qaeda. We are going to root out their networks, their bases. We are going to make sure that they cannot attack U.S. citizens, U.S. soil, U.S. interests, and our allies' interests around the world. In order for us to do that, we have to ensure that neither Afghanistan nor Pakistan can serve as a safe haven for al-Qaeda. And unfortunately, over the last several years, what we've seen is essentially al-Qaeda moving several miles from Afghanistan to Pakistan, but effectively still able to project their violence and hateful ideologies out into the world.
Are you concerned at all? Because some people say the more troops you put in, it's just going to inflame the situation. It's going to make it worse. Yes. What do you say to them?
Well, I'm very mindful of that. Look, I'm enough of a student of history to know that the United States in Vietnam and other countries and other epochs of history have overextended to the point where they were severely weakened. And the history in Afghanistan obviously shows that that country has not been very favorably disposed towards foreign intervention. And that's why a central part of our strategy is to train the Afghan National Army so that they are taking the lead increasingly to deal with extremists in their area. That's been one of the few success stories that we've seen over the last several years, is the Afghan National Army actually has great credibility. They're effective fighters. We need to grow that, and that's part of the reason why we want to make sure that they're trainers there. But the last point I would make, a request was made for increased troop levels in Afghanistan. I have already authorized 17,000. We're now adding 4,000 trainers specifically designed to train Afghan security forces. But what I've also said to the Department of Defense and what I will say to the American public is that we now have resourced properly this strategy. It's not going to be an open-ended commitment of infinite resources. We've just got to make sure that we are focused on achieving what we need to achieve.
What you seem to be saying is we have to win. There's no choice here. So does that mean if more is needed, if the commanders come back to you and say we may need more troops, Mr. President, to do this, you're going to be ready to do that?
What I will not do is to simply assume that more troops always results in an improved situation. I think there was a good argument after us scrubbing this very hard and talking to a lot of our allies in the region, including the Pakistan, Afghanistan governments, the Europeans, and our other NATO allies, that this was the best strategy. But just because we needed to ramp up from the greatly under-resourced levels that we had doesn't automatically mean that if this strategy doesn't work, that what's needed is even more troops. There may be a point of diminishing returns in terms of troop levels. We've got to also make sure that our civilian efforts, our diplomatic efforts, and our development efforts are just as robustly encouraged And so, for example, in the budget that I've presented to Congress, I've said we've got to increase foreign aid in Afghanistan, and we've got to increase foreign aid in Pakistan, and I'm going to be really pushing Congress, because sometimes foreign aid is a juicy target, particularly during tough times. I'm going to tell them this is central to our strategy, and it can save lives and troops if we properly execute it.
But you described this in very dire terms. I mean, and there's no question that things are worse than ever in Afghanistan. You would agree with that?
I do.
But you're saying...
Well, let me make sure I'm clear. They're not worse than they were when the Taliban was in charge.
Yes.
And Al-Qaeda was operating with impunity. We have seen a deterioration over the last several years, and unless we get a handle on it now, we're going to be in trouble.